Okay, I think you're good to go, sir.
Glenn, you don't look any better on film, on Zoom.
I love you too, honey.
Oh,
All right, let's make sure. You got everyone? Okay, we're gonna get started. I'd like to call this meeting to order of the Township of Springfield Planning Board, July 15th, 2020. Adequate notice has been given in accordance with the Sunshine Laws. Notice was published on June 11th, 2020 in the local source, the official newspaper for the Township of Springfield, and posted on the Annex Building, June 12th, 2020. Let's do a salute to the flag, please. Everyone rise. Here. I pledge allegiance
to the flag.
Flag
of the United
United
States of
States
America, and to the
republic
republic for which it stands, one
One
nation,
nation.
under God, indivisible,
Indivisible,
with liberty
and
and justice for all.
justice. Perfect. All right. Okay, let's do a quick roll call. Jen Law, please.
Committeeman Rich Huber,
He's here.
Mr. David Barnett is absent, Mr. Andrew Schwartz,
Present.
Mr. Jerry Fernandez is absent, Ms. Sylviane Grisbowski is absent, Mr. Aaron Lawfer,
Here.
Mr. Brian Brendel,
Here.
Ms. Marissa Ruggiero is absent right now, Mr. Scott Wishna,
Here.
Vice Chair Kessel,
Here.
and Chairman Tiger.
Yes, I'm here. Perfect. Perfect. Okay, so we'll do this individually. There's the May 4th, 2020 meeting minutes. I'm sure everyone had a chance to review it in its entirety on Google Drive. Any concerns, any questions? We'll do a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Anyone abstain? Perfect. Okay, so that one passes. We also have the June 4th, 2020 meeting minutes. Can I entertain a motion for the June 4th, 2020 meeting minutes? I see Mr. Brendel getting ready to take himself off mute to make that motion.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, Brian, seconded. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, motion passes. No one abstained. That's good too. Okay, the next one was we had a resolution. This is for Clinton Avenue. Mario Ferrera, 15 Clinton Avenue, Block 802, Lot 10. The board acted favorably last meeting to approve a minor subdivision with bulk variances into creation of 2 lots. I understand that it was on the Google Drive and we've all had a chance to review it. Did anyone have any questions or amendments or anything they want to bring to the board's attention before we vote on this? Okay, seeing none, Mr. Schwartz wants to make a motion to approve.
I move to approve the resolution for Marion Avenue.
Clinton Avenue.
Clinton Avenue, sorry.
Does Aaron want to second it?
Sure, I'll second the motion.
Okay, can we have a quick roll call?
Mr. Schwartz,
Yes.
Mr. Lawfer,
Yes.
Mr. Brendel,
Yes.
Mr. Wishna,
Abstain.
Vice Chair Kessel,
Yes.
and Chairman Tiger.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Perfect. Every 6 months, we do a quick update on what's going on in the town, a redevelopment update. So I figured at this point in time, Mr. Disco would give us a little update on what's going on with Saks, with Gomes. We have Wawa opened up, so a quick 5 minutes. Mr. Disco, do you mind just updating the board on it?
That's fine. In no particular order, but I'll start with the Church Mall redevelopment project. That's the Charlie Larkin one located on the corner of Church Mall and Morris Avenue. That construction started in November of 2019. Very intermittent due to a lot of utility relocations. If you've driven by, you've noticed that the first floor is foundations are in. They've used Superior Wall. So those are all precast units and then connected. They've been working on the interior, and over the next 2 to 3 weeks, they will be installing the flooring, particularly in the 3 retail units. The steel is on top of the first level or first floor. The second and third floors will be framed, and that framing will be happening over a 3-month period coming up at the conclusion of that 2 to 3 week period where they finish the floors and in some interior work. So you'll see the height of that structure start going up in August, September, October. The Gomes project, they did install our walkway, if anybody noticed, just in time for no school. The 2 residential buildings were scheduled to be demolished. They're waiting on asbestos testing for that. The state has had a little bit of a spat with the developer, claiming that they took out some asbestos materials when they shouldn't have. That's delayed them. They will be in a position, they have submitted structural foundation drawings. Yesterday, they submitted a revised site plan set for compliance. The significant things on that is that JCP&L has added 2 electrical vaults, and they are massive, and they are going to lose 2 parking spaces by siting these near the dumpster area. They're also adding a generator, which is not to run everything in the event of a shutdown, but just the key doors and elevators for residential units. They've revised potentially to recapture those 2 parking spaces under the Center Street wing of the building. I shared a cutout of that with Keenan today, just so we know what's going on. They're going to lose a staircase to basically recapture those 2. So hopefully that staircase loss doesn't create building code issues, and we'll be back to square one otherwise. But
Because you'll keep the board up to date on any changes with that is necessary.
certainly, they also have some meter changes. Each JCP&L is requiring that each residential unit be metered separately. So your typical meter that you see on a house, a version of that has to be for all 140 units. Most of those are going to get hidden again under that wing where the parking is along Center Street, not visible to the public, but there may be some that are going to be visible elsewhere. We're trying to shield the rear plaza area where people will be entering a lot of these storefronts. Other than that, obviously, we're just waiting for the demo work to go on. They're really going to tie the foundation and the soil excavation to the removal of the 2 houses. Saks, if anybody tuned in on July, I think it was July 6th. Yeah, July 6th, the Monday night, the Saks, or the Wilf people, Garden Homes, appeared before the Millburn Board of Adjustment. A Board of Adjustment review was generated because they have the ordinance in Millburn dictates, and Keenan might be able to elaborate more if he knows more, but essentially there's no principal structure on that 20-foot strip, only the 2 access driveways, and that is counter to the way the ordinance is written. So they had to make an appearance. They provided all of their testimony. There weren't really that many questions on it, other than there was concerns about traffic. They discounted essentially Jay Troutman's traffic analysis, even though that was done at the request of Millburn. The Millburn engineer wrote a review which referenced that the Board of Adjustment may want to have their own independent traffic. So they're working towards that. I don't think anybody anticipates long-term it's going to be problematic. They have another hearing on the 20th. That hearing will have other matters on the agenda, but the Saks project will be discussed in the sense that no new notice was forwarded, and so on July 20th, they will announce when the next Board of Adjustment date will be for Saks. It's going to be an August meeting. There is one on August 3rd, and I think they have a second one in August, so depending on their scheduling, Saks may reappear before Millburn on August 3rd. As the chairman mentioned, Wawa opened after originally scheduled to open in April. Due to COVID, they delayed that and had a recent grand opening And as far as I understand it, it's open smoothly. The gas is operational. All of the site stuff was installed prior to the opening. The adjacent residential property owner actually contacted us and expressed appreciation for the fencing and the landscaping that went in. The fencing didn't get into essentially the week before the opening. And everything on the site looked pretty tight, quite frankly. So good news on that regard.
Perfect. We need to get more redevelopment, and then next time you do an update towards the end of the year, it'll be 10 minutes long, so that way it's we have more redevelopment. So with that, any questions from the board for Mr. Disco? I'll just go in order of how we normally do it. Mr. Fernandez, I believe, just joined too. Any questions?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here. No, I'm here. No question.
Mr. Schwartz,
I'm good, thank you.
Mr. Wishna,
I think the only question I've got to Gomes is how did they not anticipate the electrical utility issues when they came before the board? Wasn't that all due to a utility issue in the first place?
Yeah, the final site plan, I guess the amended final site plan when they changed the location was so that they wouldn't have to relocate the aerial telephone pole and utility pole lines. The size of the vaults was somewhat unanticipated by the applicant reportedly. They are not allowed, or we asked if they could put these at rooftop, and they responded that JCP&L wouldn't allow that. They want access 24/7. That's understandable. PSEG and other locations, other municipalities is a little bit more flexible. And the site is just very limited. So again, there's a small non-rectangular strip between the parking, on the surface parking, and then the access drive, which goes under the ground. And the vaults were a little bit too big to fit there. So hence they had to do the parking space. Prior to the elimination of the stairway, I had forwarded that information to council and planner, and there was a possibility they would have had to come back to the planning board. So they're not out of the water yet by any regards, but the only other area, because remember, there's no buffer along the property lines, that was eliminated. The only other locations you can go is in the front of the building. I don't think anybody wants that. And then in the, I call it the plaza area, the rear of the Morris Avenue facing retail, which has a landscaping, brick pavers, that type of thing, supposed to be an aesthetic gathering type of place. So that's always a possibility to put it there, but there are rear doors all over the place for every retail unit there. So it's probably not something from a potential lease tenant that they would want that equipment there. So
well,
it's a fair
Michael,
question. I don't have the answer why the applicant didn't anticipate it. And I think it's just larger than they thought.
we'll leave it to you to resolve it with them.
Yeah, the stairwell issue seems to be the one that would be the trigger for any potential re-engineering of the whole plan.
Yeah, although we haven't seen architecturals come back in on that yet, the Jacinto Rodriguez did say they spoke with Noel Muser, the architect, and they can work around it.
Okay.
Ms. Kessel?
No questions.
Mr. Loeffler? Aaron?
No questions.
Mr. Huber?
No questions.
Mr. Brendel?
No, thanks for the update, Mike.
Great. All right, perfect. Mike, I have no questions. Thank you very, 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 very much. Let's move ahead with our first application. This is New Singular Wireless PCS LLC, AT&T, 1 Cornell Parkway, block 3903, lot 16. This is a waiver for site plan and cell phone tower. I'm sure everyone received Mike's letter to us dated June 22nd, where he feels that This meets the state codes of where a site plan waiver is warranted, but let's put the applicant on for a few seconds to kind of introduce the application, and Mike will give a quick overview, very brief overview, and then we can move the application. So Apu, let's bring them on.
Which names am I looking for, sir?
Let's see. Glenn, who is joining us?
The person joining us tonight is Christopher J. Quinn,
Come on down. You're the next contestant on.
otherwise
Live.
affectionately known in our office as Quinn the Lesser, because there's Quinn the Greater too. But he's much older than Chris. Chris, you there?
Chris, you're on mute.
Yep, I just took myself off mute. I don't know if you can see me for some reason. Let me share. Start video up. Okay.
There you are, Chris.
Good evening. Thank you very much for your time tonight. I heard your introduction. That's pretty much what we're proposing. This particular property, it's 1 Cornell Parkway. AT&T is near the top of the monopole on this property. They've been there for years. I think I was here in front of this board a number of years ago, modifying the site once before. They're looking to upgrade this site like you've heard other applicants do. Right now, there are 12 antennas at around 144 feet high on the site. What they're proposing to do is to swap out 6 of those antennas. There are these boxes that are behind the antennas called RR antennas. They're replacing 6 of those boxes with 9 boxes. Again, all behind the antennas. Replacing 1 cabinet on their equipment platform, which is on the roof of the adjacent building, and some other, circuitry work, cabling work, and that's pretty much it. So again, I would submit this meets the state and federal standard for not substantially changing the structure itself. But I mean, I can just answer any questions you have, or
No, I think that's good. Mr. Disco, we've read your letter. Can you just put a little testimony on what that you reviewed it and agree that it meets state standards?
It meets not only the state, but the federal standards, the collocation laws. There's no height change here. There's no major expansion of the footprint of the ground stuff. It's just really using technology to replace facilities and put newer ones on. It's very straightforward. As indicated, there's been multiple site plan waivers for this site, 2006, 13, 14, and 16. This is routine for every cell tower throughout New Jersey.
Perfect. Okay, I think that's good. I think it's time we can move this application.
Yep. Structural calcs were submitted and signed and sealed, given to the building department. So no weight change will result in any overturning of this stuff.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Disco. Any members of the board have any questions? I'm going to quickly go in order. Mr. Schwartz?
I'm good, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I would suggest you don't have to do a run through on that. This is
Okay.
just a recommendation. This is
Sure.
not, this is different. If anybody has anything, they can certainly put their mic on and cut in like I just did.
All right. So, I don't need to do the public on this, right?
You should, because you're making a recommendation. Is there
Yeah.
any public here on that? I don't know that there is.
Yeah. Any members of the public that wish to speak, if they raise their hand on application 11-2019 S for, on waiver 2028, just for the cell phone tower application. Please speak up. I don't see any questions, no open questions at this time. Okay, I'm going to close this matter to the public, and I'm going to ask Mr. Brendel to make a motion on this application.
How do I unmute?
You're
I'm
good.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion to approve waiver 2020A for 1 Cornell Parkway.
And I think
I'll
Sharon,
second.
Mr. Huber seconded. Okay, can we do a roll call, Sharon? I mean, Jennifer?
Sure. Mr. Brendel,
Yes.
Committeeman Huber,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Schwartz,
Yes to approve.
Mr. Fernandez,
Yes.
Mr. Lawfer,
Yes.
Mr. Wishna,
Yes.
Vice Chair Kessel,
Yes.
and Chairman Tyler.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay,
Thank you very much for your time tonight.
perfect. The next application.
Thanks, Chris.
The next application is application 4-2020S. This is for United Windows and Doors Manufacturing. This is for an amended preliminary and final site plan, amended bulk variance to expand a paved area. If the board recalls back last year, they were before us to include more bays for some of the trucks. I think, from what's gone on, they need to add additional pavement onto the site in order to take some of the trucks off the street and move them on site. I think that we can hear from the applicant, but I believe the drainage and all that stuff has been reviewed and has been acceptable. So this should be a pretty straightforward application. So let's bring the attorney on for the applicant.
Who do I need, Mr. Keynes?
It's somebody from Mr. Hale's office,
Oh,
and it would probably be Joshua. Josh, you there?
see Joshua. All right, see him joining.
Mr. Hale also.
Oh, Mr. Hale, that's even better.
It's only one or the other. We want Josh. We want.
Okay. Okay, Josh, can you hear us? You're still on mute.
Nicholas Graviano.
Okay, Mr. Hale's there. Mr. Hale, are you doing this or is Josh?
Yeah,
doing it?
I'm going to do this. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so Mr. Hale, I don't know if you heard the opening of the meeting.
Yes, I've been watching since we were talking about Glenn and his jacket.
Oh, okay. Well,
Ouch.
Sorry,
he's
Glenn.
You look very nice. You look very nice, Stephen.
Yeah. No
So,
beard jokes.
Mr. Hale, if you can do a very, very brief overview, like what we said before. I understand it's just adding additional pavement. I know that Mr. Disco's letter states that the drainage has all been reviewed and so forth, that it was designed for the additional pavement anyway. So this is pretty straightforward. So if you can give us a little overview.
Great, thank you. And I know in the wings we have Howard Rose, the president of United Window, and his operations manager, Dominic Benevenga, Michael Rowe, our engineer, and Nicholas Graviano, our planner. Again, yes, I agree, Mr. Chairman. It's a fairly straightforward application. We were before the board last year, and in fact, the area and Mike and Keenan recognize this. The area where they planned the extra pavement was actually on that plan as a future submission to the board, and they did prepare the drainage and for that anticipated paving. Yes, and exactly as you mentioned, Chairman Tiger, the purpose of this additional paving is actually twofold. The primary is to add, on the previous floor plan, they relocated one of the offices to the corner of that building, and this actually will then help on the for smaller vehicles, vans and pickup trucks to pick up material. Luckily, Springfield's very happy to have a business like United here in their municipality. So yes, that's the purpose of it. And then secondarily, yes, it'll help to take off some of the smaller trucks, not the tractor trailers, but some of the box trucks, things that are out during the day making deliveries will then be able to be on a periodic basis stored in that area. We've also, and our engineer can confirm this, if Mr. Disco requires some testimony, that no vehicles will be parked within the site triangle. Also, another factor is that there, despite the additional pavement, there's still a significant area of grass cover on that corner, and the variance is somewhat de minimis. I don't want to step on the engineer's toes, but what's permitted is 72%. We're at 71.7 now, and we're looking to go to 73.4%. Again, United Window is a great commercial and business asset to Springfield, and lucky to see that they're busy and growing despite the difficult times. So that's an overview, Mr. Tiger.
Yeah, Mr. Hill, I'd like to just hear from the engineer very briefly. I don't think we need a planner or hear from window doors. I think I'd like to hear justifying the drainage and the lot coverage.
Sure.
And I
Right.
go to
So
Mike.
let me call upon Michael. I think you're somewhere in Michael Rowe from Car Engineering.
I'm not seeing anybody by that name, sir.
Let me.
Howard Rose, who are you asking for?
Well, Howard's there. Hey, Howard, you can put on your video if they want to see you. They should at least get to see your face.
I'm not sure why it's not showing my video.
Who's that, Michael?
No, that's Howard.
No, we can hear you. I just didn't,
All right, did we find Michael?
let me,
There you go.
I know he's on.
Michael, turn your mic on.
There's a Michael Pucci. I'm not sure if that's the same person. And then there is somebody with the name of Mike Crow.
Yeah, Mike Rowe. Yeah. Oh, that Mike Rowe is probably Michael Rowe. Is that you, Mike?
Yes, that's me. I am now here.
Okay.
It rebooted me. Sorry.
Okay, Michael, put your video on, would you please?
All right, let's see. Video should. Okay, there we go.
Okay.
There you are.
Yep.
Michael,
Sorry.
Michael, raise your right hand, please.
Yes, sir.
Do you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth in proceedings before the board tonight to help you God?
Yes, I do.
Michael, what's your name?
Michael Rowe.
You better spell your last name because spell your last name, will you?
Rowe. It is actually, yeah, I'm not Dirty Jobs, but it's spelled the same.
Okay. Michael, have you testified before this board before on other occasions?
Yes, I have on the previous resolution for this site.
Okay, and your license is still valid as of tonight?
Yes, it is.
And you're being qualified as a licensed professional engineer, but you
Yes.
also have you have a planning license too?
I do not have a planning license.
Okay, all right, and you heard the proffer that Mr. Hale made. Did you disagree with anything that Stephen said?
I did not disagree with anything that Stephen said.
And your license is valid as of tonight?
Yes, it is.
All right, Mr. Chairman, he's all set to go. Stephen, he's all set to go, and
Yeah, I think-
that there's not a whole lot to do here.
Yeah, I think we can accept your qualifications. I'll make that assumption on the board's behalf. I think we need to just focus on the drainage. That's the only issue that I see that the board is from the lot coverage, which is increased drainage. I think from the indication of the letter, the stormwater was designed to include the drainage, the forecasted future drainage. So if you could just quickly cover that, and then we'll go to our engineer to make sure he agrees with you.
Yeah, when we originally did this job, we wanted to make sure that we didn't add any water whatsoever from this property to go back into the detention pond. So the entire thing was designed for the pavement that is a part of this, as well as the modifications to the other area. We removed some grass to put in the additional loading bay. So when we did it, we actually took more of the drainage from the site that was on there just because we had the ability to do that, and just over designed it to actually reduce the loading on the detention pond in the back in the assumption that this pavement was going to be happening shortly in any case.
Perfect. Anything, have you had an opportunity to review Mr. Disco's letter?
Yes, I have.
And you agree with everything in there? You have no problem complying with any of this?
There's no problem complying with anything that's in Mr. Disco's letter.
Have you had an opportunity, well, it's more planning on Mr. Keenan's letter. Do you have a chance to review his and any of the things with driving and the parking areas to be able to meet any of those issues as well?
Yeah, there was no problem with meeting any of those issues.
Perfect. Okay. I'm going to open up Mr. Disco.
I think the engineer should just reiterate what Mr. Hale said regarding the site triangle. If he could
Yeah,
add some testimony on that.
Yeah, we have the purpose of the pavement is to ensure that there is no pavement within the site areas, within the site triangles, and that from what I've been told, they will comply that there will be no parking within the site triangles.
We'll make that as a condition of approval.
And either the engineer or Mr. Rose should just confirm number 8, that there'll be no outdoor storage there.
Yeah, I can make that proffer, actually. Sorry, Howard. That was brought before the board at the last hearing, and yes, there will be no outdoor storage. And I think it was deemed that the compactor area and the like, and garbage areas were not considered storage. But in fact, I can have Mr. Rose briefly be sworn and confirm that.
No,
Well,
I don't think that's necessary. As long as we'll put a condition, we'll continue the condition that there's no outdoor storage. And I think it's very reasonable that the trash enclosures aren't considered outdoor storage. Would you agree,
And-
Mr.?
I would just add that the applicant does have a wonderful problem in that they're so busy and they're working, I guess, 2 shifts, that they have substantial truck traffic, and they do have trucks that stage on Diamond and Fadum at evening hours. And so I would certainly recommend that. And again, the 2019 approval has not been constructed yet. So the combination of the 2019 and this hopefully removes trucks from the roadway, from overnight parking. And that's been a big problem. It's been a very difficult problem for the municipality to try to find alternatives. I know they've looked at alternatives and alternatives off-site in the area. And so this makes the most sense, and I would recommend the board approve it.
Okay, great. Mr. Hughes, any questions or concerns?
No, nothing further. I think any
Perfect
concerns here have been addressed.
Mr. Chairman, if I might indulge, I know we said, but our planner is here. If I could just have him for 30 seconds, confirm that he has no issues with the review from Mr. Hughes, because we are seeking a variance.
Sure, go ahead.
And I see, well, at least on my screen to my lower left, Mr. Nicholas Graviano.
He's there. Can you?
Mr. Graviano, you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, proceedings before the board tonight, so help you God?
I do.
And Nick, you were qualified the previous time as the planner for this project, were you not?
No, I was not. I have been qualified by this board for a previous application, though.
I thought you were on this one too. Okay, so you're still licensed and your license is still valid, is that right?
That is correct.
And you regularly appear before boards all over New Jersey doing applicants' work, is that correct?
Yes, I've appeared before approximately 100 boards in 16 counties, including most recently before your zoning board last month.
Mr. Chairman?
I don't have any issues with his qualification. I'm sure you're a little jealous that he has a jacket on and you don't, but that's okay.
I got a time, he doesn't, so. I mean, come on.
Okay, so if you can give us a brief overview and go on the record with Mr. Hughes's letter, but go ahead.
Yes, just briefly, the applicant is requesting one variance as part of this amended preliminary and final site plan application. The application is requesting a very slight increase in the impervious coverage allotment. The township code specifies 72%, whereas the applicant is requesting roughly a little bit over 73%. Clearly, you've heard the reasons for the expansion of the parking and loading area. It can be granted under the C2 criteria, whereas hardship need not be demonstrated. Which must be demonstrated is that it relates to a specific piece of property. Where you have block 4201, lot 5, an existing window and door manufacturing facility located on 4.1 acres in the industrial zone. The applicant must also demonstrate purposes of the MLUL would be advanced by a deviation in the zoning ordinance requirements. In this case, this project advances purpose A, to encourage municipal action to guide the appropriate use of lands, which will promote the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare. And you heard Mr. Disco indicate that the enhanced parking and loading area will serve the business in a safe and efficient manner to get the trucks off the street. Additionally, this helps advance purpose G to provide sufficient space and appropriate location for a variety of industrial uses to meet the needs of New Jersey citizens. This is an improvement to a permitted use in the industrial zone. In this case, the benefits from this deviation and the impervious coverage requirement would substantially outweigh any detriment. There's no substantial impairment to the zone plan or zoning ordinance, and the applicant's proposal is in keeping with the established development pattern of the industrial area in which it is located.
That was a mouthful. Keenan, do you have any questions about his testimony? Do you agree for the board standpoint?
No questions.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Hill, anything further?
No, we have nothing further, other than if Mr. Rose wants to say a quick hello to the board, and we can wait till after you vote. But
That would be smart.
Okay. Mr. Rose, do you have anything to add?
well, you got to
We got to swear you in.
Nothing in particular, I think-
No, he's just gonna say hi.
Oh,
He's
go
not,
ahead.
he's not even gonna be a fact witness. The facts are already in.
That's
How you
right.
doing, Mr. Rose? Everything going well?
Doing well. Thank you.
Well, good. We're glad that you guys are in Springfield, and thanks for being a part of our community.
We're glad to be here.
Absolutely. So at this point, I'm going to take this application out to the public. Any members of the public that wish to speak on application 4-2020S? If you raise your hand, I don't see anyone in the Q&A. It says no questions, but we'll give it a minute. Going once, going twice. Seeing none, I'm going to close this matter to the public, and we're going to kind of poll the board. Let's go in order. Mr. Fernandez,
No questions. I'm good.
Mr. Schwartz,
No questions on this application, Mr. Chairman.
thank you. Mr. Wishna,
No questions.
perfect. Mrs. Kessel,
No questions.
Mr. Loeffler.
No questions.
Okay, Mr. Huber, committee meeting.
Oh,
Huber?
yeah, forget about me.
Yeah, you're easy to forget.
Let's go.
You're,
He wants
you're the
to go
biggest
to
guy on the
committee, see?
board, but we forget about you.
So. I'm good.
Okay, seeing no questions from you, Mr. Brendel.
No questions, but thank you for presuming.
Okay, and I have no questions at all. So seeing none from the board, I'm going to close this matter and ask Mr. Huber to make a motion.
A motion to accept, I don't have the paperwork in front of me.
Application 4-2020.
That's what he said.
Second.
We'll have a quick roll call.
Who seconded it?
Jerry.
Thank you, Jerry.
Committeeman Huber,
Yes.
Mr. Fernandez,
Yes.
Mr. Schwartz,
Yes to approve.
Mr. Lawfer,
Yes.
Mr. Brendel,
Yes.
Mr. Wishna,
Yes.
Vice Chair Kessel,
Yes.
and Chairman Tiger.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Mr. Hale, we will not be having a meeting in August unless some urgent action comes up. So I'm assuming the board has never had a problem if you want to proceed at your own risk with this.
Yeah, and Howard, I'll explain that to you, but they're not going to hold up the construction if you want to proceed prior to the adoption of the resolution and the appeal period.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you very much. Thank you.
It seems that Mr. Disco feels that we need to get this done. So I would impress upon you to get it done, get the development done, so that way we can take some of the cars off the street.
Absolutely.
All right.
Perfect. All
Question,
right.
Stephen?
Yes.
Stephen, did you get county planning board approval? Or are they
I-
gonna waive it? Because it's nothing?
I think on this section, it doesn't trigger it.
Just get a letter so that Jen can put it in the file saying that it doesn't trigger anything, okay?
No problem. We'll get that done.
Thank you.
All right.
All right, Mr. Hale, thank you for coming as always.
Have a great night, everybody, and see you at the next hearing, probably. All right.
September.
Be safe.
Okay, next application is application 5-2020S. This is Springfield Diversified Partners LLC, 901 Mountain Avenue, block 3901, lots 1 and 3. I think it's like Echo Plaza. It's for an amended preliminary and final site plan, amended parking variance for Dollar Tree. Mr. Pittman? Let's Apu, if there should be a Bruce Pittman.
Yep, he's joining now.
Perfect. Once he joins, I have a few. Mr. Pittman, thank you. It's been a very long time before we've had you before the board. We can't hear you.
Turn your mic on, Bruce.
Thank you, Glenn. There you go. This is a application for an amended preliminary and final site plan and for an amended variance, essentially because of and to permit a tenancy by Dollar Tree in replacement of Steve Leonard's, essentially arising from a reconfiguration of the parking, but principally because of a shortage or a reduction in the parking spaces from 504 down to 496. The fact of the matter is that the applicant said that the traffic pattern has not changed. The reduction of eight parking spots is really de minimis and does not affect adversely the tenant usage will show to be equal or less than 2 Leonard's. That's in part based upon Mr. Disco's report. And we are prepared to proceed, if I may.
Yeah. Go ahead. Who's your first witness?
Our first witness is Michael Pucci, our professional engineer.
That'd be perfect. Can we bring Mr. Pucci on, Apu, and then have Mr. Keynes swear him in?
Michael, you have to unmic yourself or unmute yourself.
All right.
There you go.
I got.
Can we see you?
Because I don't.
Mike, turn your video on too, buddy.
Ah, there I go.
There he is.
Like frozen.
All right. He's on Broadway. Michael, would you raise your right hand, please?
Oh.
Do you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth in proceedings before the board tonight, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Michael, what's your name?
Michael Pucci, P-U-C-C-I.
And by whom are you employed?
CPL Partnership.
And what do you do for them?
I'm a managing member. I run the engineering department. I've been here for 41 years.
And you're a licensed professional engineer in the state of New Jersey?
I am.
Have you ever appeared before the Springfield Planning Board?
I don't think I've had that pleasure yet, no.
Well, tonight's your big night.
Okay.
Michael, you regularly prepare plans before
I do.
board? And you regularly do applications such as this? And you're
Appeared before planning and zoning boards in Superior Court throughout the state, yes.
okay. Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, I don't take any issue with, other than the fact that 41 years you should have come before us one more time, than this.
I've been in Springfield, I just haven't appeared before you. I worked on Echo Plaza in the late 70s, early 80s.
Well, welcome to Springfield. So if you could, Mr. Pittman can kind of take you through it, but just focus, if you can give us some insight onto the parking count, why it went down, that would be helpful. And if there is any places and areas that you can reobtain some of the parking, that would be helpful. But Mr. Pittman, your witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pucci, are you familiar with the Echo Plaza Shopping Center site?
Yes, I am.
And has your firm been the principal planner and engineer for the Echo Plaza site over a number of years?
That is correct.
And were you asked to determine a final count with respect to the present parking at that site?
That is also correct.
And how did you do that?
I physically sent my staff out there and had them count parking spaces and certify to me, and I went through the layout of the plan one by one with him to make sure all the spaces that were shown were actually out there.
And how many spaces were counted?
Currently, there are 496. I know the application originally granted 504, and somehow a count of 490 has been thrown out there as an existing condition, but we verified just this week that there are 496 on site.
And did you certify a plan confirming that number of 496?
I did, and that plan was submitted. I believe it's in your Google Docs or Google Drive if the board wishes to take a look at it.
I think that plan is marked A1, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Apu, can we pull up that plan just so the board can see it? Because I'd like Mr. Pucci to talk about the parking. The parking looks like it's a lot. There's some with the shopping center and there's some with the office buildings. This way they can describe both so the board has an idea of it.
Mr. Pucci, can you describe the parking that relates principally to the shopping center and that which relates to the office building?
Well, generally it was granted, and I think this was affirmed by Bob Kirkpatrick back in 2009, and I'm sure Mr. Disco will, in his letter, he also affirms that the site was granted a variance on paper. It was determined in 2009 when the site was upgraded, that is, the facades were improved, and NBD came in and Stu Leonard's came in. At that time, there was a need for, on paper, 561 spaces. However, only 504 were proposed and shown on the plan. And that was done for the entire site. It was not broken down on a user by user basis. So to attribute a certain number of spaces to one use or another was determined to be not really relevant nor required. What was determined was that the 504 that were provided at that time were adequate and sufficient. In fact, one of the board members at that time noted that the center was never more than 60% full. The traffic engineer, who will appear after me in a little bit tonight, also affirmed that the count was adequate for that time, and the board did approve the 504 that were shown. At that time, the 504 were an increase from a previous 481 or thereabouts by the virtue of adding some additional striping and modifications behind the building to increase the parking count to the what was then to be 504. Now, in the last 10 or 11 years, the life of the center has gone on its own, and it has never been reported to be a problem, at least to any of the owners or at least the management company that runs the center. And what has happened is there have been some modifications to some striping on the parking lot for some handicapped accessibility issues. And as a matter of fact, there was just a plain old count error in that 504 number that was shown on the plans back then. It said 504, but if you physically counted up every last spot, which we did, it was really 501. Now, 501 or 504, the number in the ordinance or in the variance was 504. So that's what we're held to at that time, but it decreased to 490. And we have just verified that the 490 was a result of some dumpsters that were placed along 22 up near the office building. That has been removed. And another dumpster behind the corner of NBD where that has been moved. So the true number as of now is the 496, which includes 11 handicapped and 485 non-handicapped.
And am I correct, Mr. Pucci, that the traffic pattern within the site has remained substantially the same?
It remains exactly the same. There are no changes proposed as a result of why we're here tonight. It is simply to document that over time, some of the spaces have been lost, and we've gained some back by moving some things that caused those spaces to be lost. And we're now trying to show that we have, jets, that hurt. That there are 496 when on paper due or in accordance with the previous granted variance, 504 were to be provided, a deficit of 8. And as the traffic engineer will follow through after me, he will show you how the 496 is adequate and sufficient and appropriate.
And in fact, the prior resolution from 2009 stated that the board, quote, finds based on testimony of the planner and engineer and the applicant that there is sufficient parking capacity at Echo Shopping Center to permit the change of use to a fitness facility. Do you have anything else you want to add to the board, Mr. Pucci?
No, I believe my portion of this presentation is simply to document to the board what physically exists out there today. And after Mr. Troutman presents traffic issues or testimony in support of that, then Rob Larson, my partner, who is the planner for this application, can take the board through the history and the evolution of the changes and provide to the board and Mr. Keynes the necessary proofs in support of this minor variance.
Yeah, I don't know if we're going to have all those witnesses. I don't know if it's necessary, but Mr. Pucci, I'm going to open up to Mr. Disco to kind of ask some questions because he did some reviews and some studies on the site. But before I do, is there any way, it is de minimis, and I was on the board back in 2009. In fact, 5 of our board members or 4 have been there as well. So we've had the similar members. Is there a way to add any spots, or do you feel you're maxed, that there's nowhere to add?
Actually, I think right now we could get back probably 4 more spots. 3 spots were supposed to be striped out back by Verizon in the back corner on the right. And that was just never done. So why that wasn't done, I cannot answer, but there's a cross-hatching pattern that could be removed and 3 spaces can be added there. And then back behind, in that little cluster behind the cleaners and kind of tucked in behind the gym, there is 1 space that should have been there, but we only counted 3 instead of the 4 that were shown in the site plan in 09. Simply because of dumpsters in the way. That can be moved. So I believe 4 of them can come back without any physical site improvements whatsoever.
Okay, I'm not saying you have to do it. I just wanted to leave that for the board to hear. Okay, Mr. Disco?
Yeah, I would concur. The 2009 plan had 3 spaces shown just to the right or southeast, I guess, is the right direction from the Golden Hand Spa and Verizon. I didn't know whether they didn't stripe them because there was a fear of trucks coming in and circulating around the back, but those could easily be restored to what they were supposed to be. And as the testimony was, you would get behind the what's labeled Springfield Fine Food Market or unit number 10. I guess that was the reference where one space, it's actually there, but because of the dumpster presence, can't be counted.
That's correct.
Okay.
I think
Mike-
they would be worthy to do those 4 spaces.
We'll, as any condition of approval for any additional spaces, I think what we'll do is we'll have a meeting on the site with Mr. Disco and Mr. Keenan to review with the applicant's professionals of any additional spots and to see whether they're needed or not, whether they bank it, put it on hold, but just so that way we can have that tied, that there is the ability to add it if needed. I'm assuming, given handicapped spaces, which is great that they're added on there, that's probably where some of that account got reduced. But what I want to do, Mr. Disco, if you can go through and talk through while their engineers up about some of the review that you did with in your letter, if you don't mind.
Sure. So we attempted to go back in history through every possible resolution we could find through the site. A lot of the, I'll call them minor tenants, probably never get to the planning board, either the TRC or Mr. Mardini was approving them, as conversions. For instance, Brighter Dental, I see Vintage Coffee, some of the smaller space tenants. So they obviously don't really have a parking impact. NBD and Stu Leonard's did come before the board in 2009 and 2010. Stu Leonard's not necessarily for parking, but for signage. They followed NBD after the site was changed, their facades, signage, and they added 23 parking spaces at that time. So there was a site plan application for NBD. It was believed NBD had a greater intensity of use than the previous retail uses that were there. So there was a resolution. Mr. Molman and Mr. Kirkpatrick affirmatively discussed the parking adequacy at that time. They did, Mr. Kirkpatrick, in his capacity as municipal engineer, consulting municipal engineer, since I believe he referenced 1990, had indicated that it was not a unit by unit parking analysis required. So the resolution does seem to indicate that the parking was found to be acceptable at that time. Whether a variance was actually granted or the discussion focused on whether there had to be a parking variance, I'll leave that to the legal people. But I find everything that Mr. Pucci has discussed and Mr. Pittman discussed accurate so far.
Okay, Mr. Hughes, anything further from you?
No, not for this witness.
Perfect. Any members of the board? I'm just going to go in order for questions from Mr. Pucci. So I'll turn it, Mr. Fernandez,
No, not at this moment.
Mr. Schwartz.
I'm good with this witness. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Wishna.
The only question I have is regarding the ADA quantity. So I see the 4 spaces by Outback, the 4 by NBD. It looks like 2 by the office building, and is there one other one down by the
Verizon.
Sherwin-Williams? Are we at the proper count relative to ADA?
Yes.
We are. Okay.
Perfect.
Is there any consideration to adding additional curbside pickup or additional ADA spots given the change in tenancy to more of a dry use retailer.
That's really a user or operator question that I will defer to Mr. Pittman on.
I'm sorry, can I have the question again?
So the question is there any consideration of adding either curbside pickup, designated spaces, or additional ADA space
I don't think there's been-
tenancy? To me, it seems underutilized from an ADA perspective.
I don't think that's at the moment been considered by the applicant owner.
Okay.
It seems to be working in its present state. So we don't think any such changes are necessary, but we're glad to confer with the board's professionals if.
I think it works in the present pre-COVID state, but we all can't predict what the future of retail is going to look like. So the question really was it considered? That's all.
The focus of this application truthfully has been on the new tenant and correcting the plan so the accurate number of spaces were shown. That's been the focus.
Yeah, understood.
Can I make a suggestion? I think that's a really, really smart question. And my suggestion would be that if the board acts favorably on it, to make sure that the center stays functional. The stuff that was just asked about is just going on. I'm seeing it on every site plan. I'm seeing it as I travel around various counties. So maybe just getting together with Mike, Disco, Keenan, and coming up with something that would allow for some of the drop-offs or curbside pickup, or at least the first three couple of spaces could be set aside like they do at the Wegmans now in East Hanover, where if you can't get in, you can call into the pharmacy and it's there if you don't want to go in for health reasons or whatever. I'm not saying it has to be a condition, but it just seems to me that the question is terrific, and it really, what we're facing now is going to go on for at least another 6 to 9 to 12 months. So why not just plan for it? It's no cost, it's no hardship, and it just makes the center even better.
I think Glenn, that's something that Mr. Disco can work out with them.
I agree, Mr. Chairman.
You know, the curbside there, though, with what was there before and with the restaurant on the corner, Outback, I mean, it doesn't seem to be an issue right now. They had curbside before, and they have curbside now with Outback. I mean, is that what you're talking about, Glenn?
Yeah, that, or, you know, you even go and you got a place called Chen's there. You got a fine food market. There are a lot of places now where you call, it's ready to be picked up. They walk it out to you while you're parked someplace. So you're just setting aside a few spaces. You just see it all the time. But, you know, if you don't think you need it, that's fine too.
It's a place that's pretty close to where I live, and I happen to be in that area quite a bit. I've never seen it be an issue. And with everything that's been going on now, it doesn't seem to be an issue. There's plenty of space there for the curbside, and Outback's doing a very good job with it.
The Outback's been doing it that way for years, 10 years. There's 3 or 4 spots set aside in the aisles closest to Outback, and you could do curbside pickup, well before COVID.
Yeah. And Stu Leonard's had it also where you could order online and pick up there. And again, it wasn't an issue.
Okay, I'm quiet.
I think it's the retailer to do it, not us, and not the shopping center has to do it. The retailer, depending on his business.
You know, I think if they feel that they need it, that's something that wouldn't have to come back to the board. They can work that out with Mr. Disco. That's what I think we want to just get out from the discussion. But I'm glad that's good. Rich, you're next.
No questions.
Mrs. Castle?
No questions.
Mr. Brendel?
No questions.
Mr. Loeffler?
No questions.
And I have no questions. Okay, Mr. Pittman.
Mr. Tiger, would you like to hear next from the traffic engineer?
I actually don't think we need to hear from the traffic engineer. I'd like to ask Mr. Disco. Here's the reason. Number one, We love Jay, Mr. Troutman. We've hired him ourselves, so I'm not necessarily, we wouldn't trust his testimony. But I think Mr. Disco, not that has something that can really help the board from a standpoint. We talked about that this is just a change in tendency. And I think that we, from the parking demand, Mr. Disco did some research and it's in his letter. I'd like him just to review it with the board. And then I can pull the board, and I think the board should hopefully be comfortable that the work that Mr. Disco did should suffice. So, Mr. Disco?
Well, I'll just point out as background that Mr. Troutman did do parking analyses in 2009, 2011, and then again last month in June. So with that, you know, when a tenant, when one of the major tenants leaves, the question becomes, what is the impact? Is it going to be more of an intensification of use? Is it going to be similar in the period of the day when it's busy or not? So with Dollar Tree coming, what I did was I went out, and we didn't really have a lot of time, so it happened to fall on the holiday weekend, but that's actually a good time to do this. So I went to the Dollar Tree in Watchung on a Friday, July 3rd, and I went to the Union Dollar Tree on Saturday, July 4th. And so I show that there are counts in there, and it shows the number of customers, and also when you have multiple customers that travel together, whether it's a husband and wife or children or two adults who happen to come together. I broke it down to be individual vehicle trips too. So they're documented. I think what it does show is the Dollar Tree had suggested they would get about 500 customers a day over an 11-hour period. That translates to an average of 45 customers an hour. Obviously, it's not necessarily equal over every hour period. Certainly the first hour and the last hour of the day that they're open is going to be less. We tried to guesstimate what would be what we thought a pretty intense time, which was late morning. And so those were the hours that we focused, the 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. period. And they showed that you may get anywhere for a 2-hour period of 190 customers or 155 distinct customer arrivals. So greater than 45 an hour, but to be expected. So maybe the 500 vehicle customers a day is a slight undercount. The question then becomes, what was the comparable visitation by Stu Leonard's? And that was a little bit more challenging. We don't have a Stu Leonard's in the area. We have a Paramus one, a Clifton one, but Clifton one has food. So it's really more of a food store rather than a wine and liquor store. I wasn't going to go to Connecticut to do counts. So we were able, you know, through multiple phone calls, and Stu Leonard's people were very helpful. We were able to track down the general manager, former general manager of the Springfield Stu Leonard's. His name was Robert Reynolds. And he offered that the customer visitation at Stu Leonard's was minimum of 550 a day, upwards of 1,200 customers a day, particularly around holiday periods where people are for Thanksgiving or whatever, New Year's, are going to be purchasing wines and liquors. So it seems to me that the Dollar Tree customer visits is not going to surpass the peak of what Stu Leonard's was experiencing. They did anecdotally say, and I mentioned this, that during COVID, their sales were up 30 to 50%. They were one of the few retail types of operations that were open in the early parts of COVID. They were very proactive in the way they dealt with customers, with the calling in and then dropping, you know, having the pickups. So I think on balance, you're not going to see an increase overall on the peak from Dollar Tree to Stu Leonard's. I certainly commented, I think the AM would be more intense, but the PM would probably be less intense. I think it's valuable to have Jay on the record, though, Mr. Chairman. I think he certainly could talk to any changes in the overall demand from 2009-11 to now with any changes in the tenants. Obviously, you couldn't measure these multi-tenant shopping centers at this time because the values just aren't there.
Okay, Mr. Pittman, let's put Mr. Troutman on for a brief overview, and that he concurs with Mr. Disco, so the board relies on, Mr. Disco. So, Apu, can we have Mr. Troutman on?
Yeah.
Hello.
He's there.
I see him. Okay, good.
Glenn, are you gonna swear him in?
Yes, I am. Jay, raise your right hand, please. Do you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth in proceedings before the board tonight, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
What is your name?
Jay Troutman, Troutman.
And you're a licensed civil engineer, a licensed professional engineer in the state of New Jersey, right, Jay?
Yes,
And you have a particular expertise in traffic, is that correct?
correct.
And you have done work all over the state, including work, you've done work all over the state, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I think that's all we need from him.
Yeah, I think we can accept him as a witness. He's been hired by us before as the board. So, Jay, Mr. Troutman, do you mind just a quick overview and also, whether you concur with Mike's review from the board?
Yes, Mike did an excellent job. I mean, the first main point is that you lost a large retail tenant that vacated a bunch of parking demand, and you're gaining another somewhat large retail tenant that's going to take up that demand. So any impact is going to be very minor. You might have some shifting of hours, maybe even some favorable shifting into a morning period when there's not as much demand at the center. And probably the one number I just want to share with the board is that back in 2011 and also in 2009, we did extensive surveys of parking demand, all hours, all days. And by far the heaviest overall demand at this center tends to be on a weeknight around 6 or 6:30 when the gym was busy and the restaurants were busy. The office was empty, or emptying out, I should say. And the highest number we ever found through hours and hours of occupancy data when this center was humming along was 264 total occupied spaces on a site that had anywhere from 490 to 500 spots. So there's just plenty of available parking. I've been a user of the center since I did those counts. That patterns continue to hold. So I see no detriment with this variance. I think you have plenty of parking available as it is.
Okay, I think that Mike concurs. Mike, Mr. Disco, you concur with that, correct?
I do.
Okay. Mr. Pittman, anything further?
I have Robert Larson, the planner, but frankly, a lot of the testimony, I don't think it's necessary unless the board wants to hear of him.
I concur. I don't need it. Mr. Keenan, you don't believe we need him on for any testimony?
Yeah, I think the data that Mr. Troutman and Mr. Disco provided make very clear that there's sufficient parking available on the property.
Perfect. Okay. Mr.
I would
Pittman,
also just ask, Mr. Chairman, I would just ask Mr. Troutman, the changes that are being contemplated here, given the size of the shopping center and all of the testimony that's been put on, they're truly de minimis in your opinion. Is that not an accurate statement? That's what I'm getting from your testimony. Is that right?
That is correct.
And the fact is that you could pick up a couple of the lost spaces if in fact it was even found to be necessary. Is that correct?
Yes.
I'm done, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
okay. So with that, you have nothing further, Mr. Pittman?
I have nothing further.
Okay, so at this point in time, I'm going to open it up to the members of the public. Anyone that wish to speak on application 5-2020 S Dollar Tree. I don't see any questions in the Q&A. Apu, any members of the public?
No, sir.
Okay, seeing members of the public, I'm going to close this to the board and going to see if the board has any questions. Mr. Fernandez?
No, I'm fine. I think there's plenty of parking there. I think we're okay.
Mr. Wishna?
I'm good.
Mrs. Kessel?
Question.
Mr. Loeffler?
Questions.
Mr. Huber, Committeeman Huber?
Nothing.
Mr. Brendel?
No questions.
Mr. Schwartz?
No questions. I concur based on personal experience and the testimony that the parking is more than adequate.
Perfect. And as do I. Okay, I see none. I think Mr. Schwartz wanted to make a motion for approval, but before he does, the only condition that I think, unless, and you can add in any that you feel, is that they'll do an on-site inspection and of the parking lot to see if there's any spots to be needed, and Mr. Disco and Mr. Hughes could either determine whether the spots are necessarily needed or can just be put a note on the plan that they can be added at any given time if they're found necessary. Is that okay, Mr. Pittman?
That's fine, Judge.
I'm not a judge, but that's okay.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman?
Please do not call him that.
Yeah. I've been called worse. Go ahead.
I'm adding to your ego, sorry.
Don't.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I think what would be helpful is going forward, if there's some direction, both for the owner and for municipal staff, as to how we treat the parking going forward. So we don't necessarily have to repeat this. It was 11 years ago. A lot of people changed, and hopefully we can document it in some way.
Mike, that's kind of hard because if the gym goes out, that's a big change to the parking that I think the board would want to hear. If Chen's 22s went out, it's a smaller tenant. So I think that it'll be a case-by-case basis that there may have to be a site plan. If the gym went out, that could be a total change. So if that Verizon store went out, that may not be. So
We'll handle it through the TRC and common sense.
Yep, exactly.
Mr. Chairman, let me ask one question of Mike. I would like to clean up the variance so that 5 years from now, if none of us are here, we know. So is the board giving a variance for the 496? Is that what you're going to do?
Yeah, we'll give them variance for the 496 with the condition that a site plan take a site inspection or visit out to the site with all parties and see if they can add it. And if Mr. Disco and Mr. Hughes sees that it has to be added, they'll add the spots. If they want to bank it and say they'll put a note on the plans for future use, they won't have to come back at that point in time.
But there'll be something that says 496 on it. So when we look at it 5 years from now, we won't all be scratching our heads. I think that's what Mike was looking for, right? But
yeah, 496.
Okay.
Andrew?
We all good?
Yeah.
Then, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve application 5-2020S Springfield Diversified Partners LLC, 901 Mountain Avenue, Block 3901, Lots 1 and 3, for an amended preliminary and final site plan, amended parking variance, as been discussed with the conditions that have been put forward on the record.
Mr. Chairman, will that application also include the approval of Dollar Tree store as the new tenant replacing Stu Leonard?
Yep. Yes.
Thank you.
So does Aaron, who wants to second it? Mayor Huber, do you
I'll
want to
second it.
Okay, Brendel did it. Go ahead. Roll call.
Mr. Schwartz,
Yes to approve.
Mr. Brendel,
Yes, to approve.
Committeeman Huber,
Yes.
Mr. Fernandez,
Yes.
Mr. Lawfer,
Yes.
Mr. Wishna,
Yes.
Vice Chair Kessel,
Yes.
and Chairman Tiger.
Yes, great.
Mr.
Congratulations.
Mr. Chairman, just as, like with Steve Hale's prior application, obviously you won't get to adopt a formal resolution till your September meeting. So, but my client should be permitted to proceed, or the tenant proceed to renovate the space and go forward. I guess at their risk in the event of an appeal or something like that, but
They can work, Mr. Disco and the building department, but no CO, no change of tenancy should be done until you've met all the conditions of the resolution, of whether it's the resolution or the intent of the resolution, that Mr. Disco can work through that with you.
that's the condition that they go out to the site and find any other spaces that can be banked or added.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
Okay, and then
Thank you,
also,
Mr. Chairman.
also that, you have to meet whatever signage that you're going to do wasn't part of this application, obviously.
Correct, that was not. Thank you so much.
Perfect, thank you. So before we go, just for the board's knowledge, as of now, we will not have an August meeting. The plan is, unless something urgent comes up that the governing body needs us or some redevelopment, we will not have August. We'll reconvene sometime in the beginning part of September. I'd like it to be in person if the governing body allows to be in person. Also, Jen will pull the board as it gets closer, just to make sure that we're comfortable as a board being in person versus not. And we will work with the township officials to make sure that if we are in person, that we're in a way that is a manner that it's acceptable and so forth from a public standpoint. So more to come on next steps for our next meeting. So before we do, any members of the public that wish to speak on any new business or any business or anything before the board or anything they want to say?
I take it I'm excused.
Yes,
Yes,
goodbye,
you
Mr.
are.
Thank you so much. Everyone have a great weekend.
You too.
Thank you. Stay healthy.
Okay, Pooh, any members of the public?
No members of the public, sir.
Okay. Seeing none, before we adjourn, Pooh, the board wants to thank you very much. You've been great through this process of really helping us with shepherd through this Zoom process. So thank you very much. And then Mr. Huber's making a motion to adjourn.
Okay.
All right, everyone have a good rest of the summer.
All right, bye.